Everyone ignored the secretary in the corner until the day she walked into the boardroom and owned it. They never saw me coming. In their eyes, I was just the quiet one in the corner, the girl with the low bun, plain blouses, and an awkward smile, the one who always had extra pens in her drawer and remembered everyone's birthday, even when HR forgot. I wasn't part of their meetings, their after-work drinks, their Slack jokes, or their war room sessions. I was background, reliable, replaceable. I still remember the exact moment I knew how little I meant to them. It was a Thursday morning, quarterly strategy meeting. The glass conference room on the 18th floor was buzzing with ideas and egos. I had prepped the room, printed every report, even color-coded the folders. As I placed the final coffee mug in front of the CEO's seat, one of the junior execs walked in and tossed his jacket on my shoulder like I was a coat rack. No eye contact, no thanks, just tossed it and started talking over me to someone else. 5 minutes later, I was standing outside the room, holding that stupid jacket, watching the door close in my face. They didn't invite me to stay. They never did. Even though I managed the calendar, organized the reports, and could probably summarize the company's roadmap better than half of them inside that room. But they all made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. You see, I had perfected the art of being invisible. It wasn't a flaw. It was a strategy. Being overlooked gave me access. Unfiltered, uninterrupted access. I saw the real dynamics when people thought no one was watching. I listened while they vented frustrations and bragged about backdoor deals at the coffee machine. I watched alliances form and fall, leaders rise and self-destruct, and entire departments reshape under new politics, all from my little desk near the copier. No one questioned why I stayed so long in a job that offered no clear upward path. They just assumed I lacked ambition, that I was too shy, that I didn't know any better. The truth? I had once been someone else entirely, someone they would have seen as a threat. But I chose this role deliberately. I needed the quiet. I needed the time. I needed to disappear. It's funny how power works in corporate America. It's loud, brash, and often fragile. The people with the sharpest suits usually have the weakest foundations. And the ones who whisper? Sometimes we're the ones writing the end of the story. Over the years, I became fluent in their language. I knew who cut corners on budgets, who hid losses with marketing spin, who played favorites, and who quietly sabotaged colleagues. I became the keeper of truths no one wanted to say out loud. I wasn't just organizing files. I was building something. People often think silence is submission. But for me, silence was strategy. I was watching, waiting, planning. And if they had looked closer, they might have seen the signs. Like how I always asked for my salary in a mix of company stock and cash. Or how I volunteered to coordinate vendor contracts and personally reviewed the legal clauses. Or how I requested access to the financial system not because I needed it, but just in case I ever had to process invoices. But they didn't look. They never do when you don't fit their idea of power. And honestly, that worked perfectly for me. Because behind the quiet, behind the routine and the modesty, was a story none of them knew. A life I had walked away from. A prestigious degree, a bright future, a career that should have taken me to the top of Wall Street. So, why did I trade all that for a desk job and birthday cupcakes? That's what you'll learn next. Because my silence wasn't weakness. It was the echo of something much deeper. A past I had buried, until the day I needed to dig it up again. My name is Eliza. Not that anyone at the company ever bothered to ask. To them, I was just the assistant. No last name needed, no backstory worth knowing. They saw the plain clothes, the quiet demeanor, the way I kept my head down and typed notes in meetings I wasn't even supposed to attend. But behind that silence, I carried a past that none of them could have imagined. I graduated top of my class from Wharton when I was just 21. I was the kind of overachiever professors love and peers love to hate, driven, meticulous, tireless. I landed a position at a top-tier hedge fund in New York, before I'd even thrown my graduation cap in the air. That job was supposed to be the beginning of everything, but it was also where everything ended. 3 years into that high-rise life, my older brother, my only family, was killed by a drunk driver. One moment, I was tracking billion-dollar flows of capital. The next, I was identifying his body in a hospital morgue. I unraveled after that. Quietly, like the way a thread comes loose from a perfectly stitched suit, work became unbearable. The people, the pressure, the endless chase for more, it all felt meaningless. So one morning, I walked out of the office. I didn't even take the elevator. I walked down 31 flights of stairs and never looked back. For months I drifted. Eventually, I settled in a new city under a new name, determined to live a smaller, quieter life. I didn't want to be noticed. I wanted to disappear, to become no one. And so, I took a job no one from my past would ever associate with someone like me. Administrative assistant at a tech startup. I still remember the recruiter's face when she saw my resume. I'd scrubbed it, of course. No mention of Ivy League degrees or hedge funds, just community college coursework and 2 years as a temp. She smiled, a little too knowingly, and asked, "Are you sure this is the kind of role you're looking for?" I lied and said, "Yes, I just want something stable." It was the truth in a way, but not the whole truth. I didn't want power, not yet. I wanted proximity to it. I wanted to be close enough to learn how this new world worked, without being pulled into its politics or spotlight. And most of all, I wanted time. Time to observe, to heal, to think. In that quiet corner desk near the copier, I became invisible. But I was always listening. While they saw a paper pusher, I was studying the anatomy of ambition. While they whispered secrets within earshot, I took notes, not on paper, but in patterns, in habits, in the way one glance from the CEO could silence a whole room. No one asked where I lived or what I did on weekends. That's the thing about invisibility. It's isolating, but it's powerful. You become the room. I watched as flashy new hires swaggered in with venture capital confidence, and I watched as they flamed out 6 months later. I watched engineers get drunk at Friday happy hours and spill things they shouldn't. I watched founders grow from dreamers to tyrants, and all the while, I said nothing. Because I was building something too. It just didn't look like an app or a pitch deck. It looked like trust, like patterns, like silence that was never truly empty. In the rare moments someone noticed me, like when I fixed a scheduling crisis that nearly tanked a product launch, I'd smile and say, "Just doing my job." But what they never understood was, this was never just a job. This was a decade-long strategy. And soon, I'd be ready to act. By the end of my first year, I knew more about the company than most mid-level managers. By year 3, I knew more than the executive team, but I never said a word. While they chased metrics and media buzz, I studied everything they couldn't see, or wouldn't admit. My greatest asset wasn't intelligence, or education, or even access. It was time. 10 years is a long time to be underestimated, but it's also a long time to watch, to map, to learn. I tracked leadership changes like a game of chess. Who replaced whom? Which departments had power, and which were just smoke and mirrors? I saw alliances shift, sometimes over drinks, sometimes over backstabbing and emails they thought I'd never read. But I always read them. They forgot that I had calendar access, that I managed the meeting rooms, the travel plans, the group chats. They thought their secrets were hidden in plain sight, but I was the plain sight. I kept notebooks, dozens of them, all in code only I could understand. One notebook tracked executive habits. Who came in early, who left during financial audits, who avoided tough decisions. Another recorded product rollouts and the internal doubts whispered behind closed doors. A third was all politics. Who lunched with whom, who always seemed to survive layoffs, and why. I noted everything. The HR manager who quietly helped cover up a harassment complaint. The VP who inflated numbers before each funding round. The founder who hadn't written a single line of code since year 2, but still took all the credit. It was all there. The culture fascinated me most. From the inside, it was a mess of contradictions. A startup obsessed with innovation, yet allergic to criticism. A place where everyone claimed to be building the future, but no one dared question the present. Employees came and went like seasons. Some burned out, some sold out, some were brilliant but never promoted. Others were mediocre but loud enough to rise. I studied them all, because every one of them taught me something about the system. I wasn't bitter, not yet. I didn't hate them for their arrogance or their assumptions. I counted on it. Their need to feel superior was what made me invisible, and invisibility gave me power they couldn't imagine. Occasionally, someone would ask why I'd stayed so long in the same role. "Aren't you ambitious?" they'd say, with a patronizing smile. I'd shrug and say, "I like the stability." But ambition doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes, it's just silence with a long memory. And over time, the patterns started to crystallize. The company was growing, yes. Valuations soared. Press coverage painted us as the next great tech hope. But underneath, I saw cracks no one else did. Or maybe no one else wanted to admit. The chaos was systemic, the egos too big, the product losing its soul. Still, I said nothing. I wasn't ready yet. Because understanding a system isn't the same as controlling it. And I didn't just want to watch anymore. I wanted leverage. And that meant waiting for my moment to invest. Not just with money, but with intent. That moment would come. But first, I had to keep watching, just a little longer. By year 5, the company was on fire. In the good way. We had just launched our flagship app, and the numbers exploded overnight. Downloads surged. Investors smiled. The founders were flying to conferences, quoted in Forbes, invited to panels about disrupting everything. There was champagne in the office, branded hoodies in every color, catered lunches 5 days a week. We went from startup scrappy to startup shiny almost too fast. To everyone else, it looked like the dream. To me, it looked unstable. Because while everyone was cheering the download numbers, I was watching something else. The infrastructure creaking under the weight. Our user base tripled, but our database management remained amateur at best. Security protocols were patchy. No one wanted to allocate budget for back-end improvements, too unsexy for investors. I watched engineers raise red flags in Slack threads that went unanswered. I saw customer data duplicated, mislabeled, even lost. And no one seemed to care. Marketing was worse. We were burning cash like it was monopoly money. One quarter, we spent more on influencer campaigns than we did on actual product development. One VP bragged about paying a TikToker $200,000 for a 30-second video. That same week, our servers crashed from an avoidable bug. But the optics were good, so everyone clapped. Then there was the founding team. From the outside, they looked united. A tight group of visionaries. On the inside, they were falling apart. One co-founder wanted to pivot to enterprise clients, another wanted to double down on B2C. The third? He just wanted to sell. Their disagreements were no longer whispered behind closed doors. Meetings turned into battles. I once overheard a screaming match in the hallway between two of them, right after a board call where they claimed everything was aligned. Spoiler, nothing was aligned. I logged all of it. Not because I was planning anything yet, but because I knew something they didn't. Momentum can hide dysfunction, for a while. But eventually, the cracks widen. The house starts to shake. And only the ones paying attention know where the foundations are weak. That was me. While they celebrated press features, I ran quiet simulations on what would happen if one of the founders exited. While they expanded into new markets without localization support, I was charting which teams had the highest turnover rates. They were building fast. I was watching for where it might all fall apart. And still, I said nothing. Not because I was scared, but because silence gave me options. I had seen this story before. High-growth startups where no one listened to the quiet people in the room. Where money talked and data whispered. Until it screamed. But this time, I wasn't just the observer. This time, I had begun to act. Small steps. A side conversation with a former CFO who'd left suddenly. a discreet chat with a lawyer about equity structures, a new folder on my desktop, password protected, called Contingency. No one noticed. Why would they? I was just the secretary. The real turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no lightning bolt moment. It started with a spreadsheet. I created it late one night after a particularly absurd company meeting, where we spent 30 minutes debating whether our new mascot should have sunglasses or not, while no one addressed the growing user complaints. I realized something then. I wasn't just watching a dysfunctional company. I was sitting inside an undervalued one. And undervalued companies, especially ones with messy cap tables and distracted leadership, have holes. Quiet entry points, loopholes no one's monitoring. I started small, just a few shares through an employee stock option plan. Most people sold theirs as soon as they vested. I didn't. I held. Then I created a shell company. Then two. On paper, they were minor investors. In reality, they were me. I hired a part-time financial advisor to help me navigate the paperwork, paid in cash, never with my name on the documents. When the company went through a Series C round and shares diluted, I bought more. Quietly, strategically, during late-night secondary offerings and off-the-record buybacks. Every Christmas bonus, every raise, every cent I didn't need to live, I redirected it. Sometimes I used proxies, an old professor who owed me a favor, a distant cousin on the East Coast, even an LLC registered in Montana. No one noticed. Why would they? I was just a secretary. No one expects the admin assistant to read the investor briefings more carefully than the board. But I did. By year 6, I held enough to be a silent minority voice. By year 8, I was sitting on more equity than our original CTO. By year 10, I ran the numbers and had to blink twice to believe them, 31.7%. That was my stake. Quietly amassed, legally sound. Diversified across a network of entities that all traced back to me, if you knew where to look. More than the CEO. More than any single founder. And they still had no idea. That was the beauty of it. I wasn't stealing anything. I wasn't hacking into systems or forging signatures. I was simply paying attention to what they dismissed, ignored, or thought beneath them. I'd watch them squander opportunity after opportunity. I'd watch their arrogance balloon as our valuation rose. But while they played the role of visionary, I played the long game. Patient, precise, invisible. And now? I had leverage. But I didn't use it. Not yet. Because power, like capital, is most valuable when no one sees it coming. So I kept showing up to work like nothing had changed. I still scheduled their meetings, still fetched their coffee, still answered their emails with a polite, "Will do." But every time I opened a quarterly report, every time I saw another reckless spending spree or ego-driven hire, I felt it. Not anger, not revenge, readiness. Something was coming. I didn't know what yet, but I knew when it hit I'd be prepared. And when the time was right, they'd realize, the woman they ignored for a decade? She owned the company. It wasn't the first time he blamed me. My manager, Greg, had this way of tossing responsibility around like it was a hot potato. If a presentation was late, it was because I didn't remind him. If a client pulled out, it was because I misfiled something. If he missed a deadline, it was because I failed to anticipate his needs. I used to let it slide. Smile, nod, fix it quietly behind the scenes. It wasn't worth the fight. I had a bigger plan in motion, but this time was different. It was a Thursday, end of quarter. Tension was high, revenue numbers were off, morale was low, and the board was starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Greg had mishandled a sensitive vendor contract, one we needed for compliance certification, and the documents had gone unsigned for weeks. The fallout was immediate. The company lost a key client. Legal started poking around, and just like clockwork, Greg threw me under the bus. He claimed I had mishandled the submission, that I failed to notify him, that I had overstepped my administrative role. Overstepped. That word hit me harder than I expected. By noon, I was called into HR. By 3 p.m., I was placed on administrative leave. No hearing, no discussion, just a polite, insincere smile from the HR manager and a thin envelope with the subject line, "Pending investigation." For a moment, I just sat there, numb, watching the office outside my glass box buzz on as if nothing had happened. I could see Greg through the frosted glass, already laughing with someone over Slack, probably telling them he'd handled it. But I wasn't angry. I was done. Done hiding. Done waiting. Done pretending to be powerless. I walked out of the building that day with my head held high. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't even pack up my desk, because this wasn't a setback. It was clearance. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have to pretend anymore. No more quiet nods. No more biting my tongue. No more playing the role of the invisible secretary. They wanted to see who I really was? Fine. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened a folder I had kept hidden for years. Board bylaws, shareholder rights, proxy voting power. I reviewed them line by line, confirming what I already knew. I had enough equity, enough votes, enough legal standing. They might have suspended me, but I could suspend the entire leadership team. I remember standing by the window that night, staring out into the city, heart steady, mind clear, and I whispered it aloud for the first time. "You thought I was just a secretary. Let me show you who really runs this place." That night I drafted the letter. The next morning, it was hand-delivered to every board member, along with my formal request for an emergency shareholder meeting. Not one of them saw it coming, and that's exactly how I wanted it. The room fell silent the moment I walked in. It was the quarterly board meeting. Same long table, same catered sandwiches, same whiteboards filled with half-baked strategy doodles. But this time, there was something different. Me. I wasn't wearing my usual beige blouse, or the cardigan everyone always forgot existed. That morning, I wore a tailored navy suit and heels that echoed with each step across the marble floor. No one said a word, but I could feel the confusion ripple through the room like static. I wasn't on the agenda. I wasn't supposed to be here. At least, that's what they thought. I took a seat, not in the back corner like I usually would, but at the table, near the front, directly across from Greg and the CEO. The chair of the board, Mr. Lanning, finally broke the silence. "Can we help you with something, miss?" He trailed off, staring at the screen in front of him, where the updated shareholder list had just loaded. And there it was. My name, at the top, holding 32.1% of the company. I watched their faces shift from confusion to shock to a barely disguised sense of panic. The CEO glanced at Greg, whose mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I cleared my throat. It was the first time most of them had ever truly heard my voice. "I've called for a vote," I said, calm but firm. "Per the bylaws outlined in Section 4.7, any shareholder holding more than 25% equity may call an emergency motion at a scheduled board meeting." Lanning blinked. "What kind of motion?" I opened my folder, flipping through pages I had spent years preparing. A motion to dismiss the current executive leadership team, effective immediately, on grounds of negligence, mismanagement, and breach of fiduciary duty, and to implement a transitional strategy plan, which I'll be presenting next. No one moved. No one breathed. It was Greg who finally stood up. "This is ridiculous. You're, what, even qualified for this? You're a secretary." I looked straight at him. "I was," I said, "but I've also studied every quarterly report for the last decade. I've mapped your budget leaks, forecasted your product failures, and tracked your stock dilution schemes. And unlike you," I added, "I actually read the contracts I file." I turned to the rest of the board. Over the past 2 years, our burn rate has increased by 47%, while user retention has dropped. Leadership has doubled down on vanity metrics and burned investor trust. If we continue this way, we'll be bankrupt in 18 months. I paused, then said quietly, "You know I'm right." And they did. One by one, board members began to shift in their chairs. Some looked at the CEO, others avoided Greg's eyes altogether. But most were looking at me now. Not with dismissal, not with pity, but with something new: respect. The vote wasn't even close. 6 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstained. Effective immediately, the executive team was removed. An interim advisory group was installed, and I was appointed acting chair of strategic reform. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply nodded, stood up, and walked out of that room with the same quiet stride I used for 10 years. But this time, no one overlooked me, and no one dared underestimate me again. Taking control was the easy part. Rebuilding was where the real work began. In the days following the boardroom vote, the company felt like a battlefield after the smoke cleared. Scattered, disoriented, and dangerously close to collapse. Departments lacked direction, product teams were burned out, and our finances were a tangle of vanity spending and short-sighted bets. For the first time in 10 years, people looked to me not as the quiet one in the corner, but as the one steering the ship. And I was ready. The first thing I tackled was transparency. Our data systems were a mess. Fragmented platforms, missing documentation, shadow tools nobody kept track of. Information had been hoarded like currency by insecure managers afraid of losing control, so I blew it wide open. I brought in a lean task force of ethical engineers and data scientists, people I had quietly kept tabs on for years, some from rival startups, others disillusioned with big tech politics. We created a live access dashboard for every team, showing revenue, churn, engagement, NPS, burn rate, everything. Some resisted at first, but once they realized this wasn't about blame, it was about clarity, they began to engage. I saw engineers who used to be muted in meetings now proposing fixes before problems hit. Designers started citing actual user behavior instead of assumptions. Information wasn't power anymore. Execution was. Then came the product, the shiny app that had once made us famous. It was bloated, directionless, and bleeding users. I sat down with the product teams, not in boardrooms, but at their desks. I asked them what they would build if they could scrap everything and start over. They told me. And we did. We killed 40% of legacy features in the first quarter, launched 2 MVPs in 90 days, rebuilt the core experience around actual user needs, not investor slides or Greg's pet ideas. Feedback loops were shortened, launches were smaller, faster, and backed by real usage data. Morale began to shift. People started staying late because they wanted to, not because someone threatened their job. And finally, I went hunting for talent. Not resumes, not job titles, people. I called up an old friend from MIT who was now leading a research lab in Berlin. I reached out to a marketing lead I'd admired secretly for years, someone who had scaled a fintech startup with no budget and no excuses. I found designers who weren't on LinkedIn, but had open-source contributions that solved problems our own team never could. Within 6 months, we were a different company. We didn't have the flashy offices or the VC hype anymore, but what we had was stronger, a culture built on transparency, humility, and relentless execution. By month 11, we crossed a milestone. Our churn hit a historic low. User growth was not explosive, but steady, sustainable. Revenue, for the first time, came from paying customers instead of investor lifelines. And one morning, as I walked past a team reviewing Q4 projections, someone turned and smiled. "Hey, boss, looks like we might hit unicorn status by New Year's." I paused, smiled back, and said, "Only if we stay humble." Because to me, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving what I always believed, that power doesn't come from speaking the loudest. It comes from listening the longest and acting when the time is right. It started with a single headline: "The secretary who owned the company." At first, I thought it was a joke, a clever exaggeration maybe, from some junior reporter digging for clicks. But within 24 hours, my inbox exploded. Journalists, podcasters, tech analysts, late-night hosts, everyone wanted a piece of the story. The woman they'd all ignored for a decade had just taken over one of the fastest-growing startups in the country, and not through lawsuits or corporate games, but by outsmarting everyone from the inside. They couldn't believe it, so they went digging. Old classmates from Wharton started getting calls. One of my former professors emailed me, "You really did it, didn't you?" Even a guy I dated briefly in grad school gave a quote to TechCrunch, claiming he always knew I had a quiet kind of power. "Sure you did, Ethan." Paparazzi started showing up outside the office, not for our CEO or our head of engineering, but for me. I had never been photographed before, never accepted LinkedIn connections, never spoken at a single tech event. Now my face was splashed across Forbes, the New York Times, even Vanity Fair. They called me the quiet architect, the corporate ninja, the woman who waited. Everyone wanted to know how I had done it, why I had stayed silent so long, what I was planning next. But the truth was simpler than any headline. I hadn't done it for glory. I hadn't done it for revenge. At least, not entirely. I did it because I believed in something better, and because I was tired of watching men in expensive shoes drive something I cared about off a cliff. So when a national network finally convinced me to appear on their flagship business show, Primetime, live, in front of millions, I agreed under one condition: no scripts, no pre-interviews, one question, one answer. The anchor smiled too wide, clearly expecting a soundbite. "Why did you stay quiet for so long?" she asked. The lights were hot. The room was silent. I looked directly at the camera and said, "Never mistake silence for weakness." That clip went viral before the segment was even over. They turned it into t-shirts, memes, wallpapers. My inbox now had emails from young women across the world, assistants, interns, operations staff, telling me they saw themselves in me, that they were no longer afraid to observe, to learn, to wait. But the thing no one outside the company really saw was that I never stopped working. While the media buzzed and analysts speculated, I stayed in the trenches. I still joined sprint reviews, still took the stairs, still replied to Slack messages at 1 a.m. when the product team hit a bug before launch. Fame wasn't the goal, clarity was. And I wasn't done yet. If you had told me 10 years ago that I would one day lead the company I quietly walked into as a secretary, I would have smiled politely and said nothing. That's what I did best, after all. I listened. I observed. I let the noise pass while I took notes. And in those quiet years, I learned 3 truths I now carry with me, not just as a leader, but as a woman who was once invisible in every meeting, every hallway, every spreadsheet. First, we all live under someone's assumptions. They assumed I wasn't ambitious because I didn't speak up. They assumed I wasn't smart because I didn't flaunt credentials. They assumed I was harmless because I brewed the coffee and booked the meetings. But assumptions are lazy, and in workplaces everywhere, they cost companies more than they know. We underestimate people who don't perform their confidence loudly. We overlook brilliance when it comes in quiet packaging, and we dismiss potential when it doesn't come wrapped in swagger. I was proof of that. Still am. Second, silence is not surrender. For years, people thought I lacked initiative. They couldn't have been more wrong. I was building my advantage slowly, quietly, one observation, one pattern, one opportunity at a time. Patience, in this world of urgency, is underrated. But patience paired with preparation? That's strategy. While others rushed for promotions or chased applause, I mapped the terrain. While they played politics, I studied power. I watched, not out of fear, but out of precision. And when it was time to act, I acted with everything I had. So no, I wasn't slow. I was deliberate. And third, real power doesn't yell. Real power doesn't need a title, a spotlight, or a trending hashtag. Real power is understanding the system so well that you can rewrite the rules when the time comes. It's knowing who pulls the strings and why, and then learning to hold them in your own hands. For me, power wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Of order, of integrity, of a vision long forgotten in the race for growth. And I only had the strength to rebuild because I had taken the time to understand what was broken. So here's what I want you to remember. Whether you're an intern or an executive, seen or unseen, Don't confuse visibility with value. Don't mistake noise for knowledge. And never, ever assume silence means weakness. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you never even noticed.